begin my formal remarks, I'd love to give a hand to Cody Hand, because without him, none of this would be possible. And he's such a generous and loving and kind person. And if I had 20 more minutes, I would tell you the story about how Cody and I met, but we don't have that much time. So I will start with the time that we have. And I want to introduce myself formally. My name is Kerra. I'm the daughter of Sandra, who is the daughter of Doris, who is the daughter of Queen Esther, who is the daughter of Vincent, who is the daughter of Lena. It's a hot New Jersey summer. The movie Purple Rain came out, and it was the soundtrack of the summer. I'm 11 years old and playing in my room, probably singing When Doves Cry because it's my favorite Prince song ever, and no other kids were around. I sort through my closet when I find a navy dress with white flowers. It's long and old-fashioned, and it comes with a bonnet, and I love to play dress up, so I put it on. Then something strange happens. My body feels hot and flushed. I feel the sensation of thorns pricking my skin and something fluffy between my fingertips, and my back scoops. I'm startled. I feel this stillness. I could feel people in the room, but no one is there. It isn't like I'm being possessed, more of like a presence. Now, my understanding of ghosts is limited to episodes of Scooby-Doo, but I know enough about these beings in the room that they're from a long time ago, from maybe when this dress was made. Their presence feels warm and comforting. They seem pleased that I remembered them. It feels as if they're holding me, and they let me know that I'm okay. I feel protected. It's enough, and I see something else in the room to play with, and I remove the bonnet and the dress, and I go on with my afternoon. These beings reappeared from time to time, especially when there was trouble at work or at school, and I sensed them looking out for me, kind of like imaginary playmates. Around the time I sensed these beings that I now understand are my ancestors, they showed the reruns of Roots, the television miniseries. And if you haven't seen it, it chronicles the experience of captured Africans from Africa to the United States and their journey toward freedom. A Roots reboot aired in 2016. I loved Roots because it was like watching the stories of my ancestors come alive. And I decided to read the book when I found it in my school library. And those of you in the audience who know me know that I'm a little extra. And the Roots, the book has 1,100 pages, which means that's 100 pages for every year that I was alive at that point. Remember, I'm 11 years old. And so I got to page 260 and no further. However, throughout my life, I read other, much shorter slave narratives. And this continued all the way through high school until I was a young adult. And except for an odd glimmer here or there, the ancestors were mostly silent during my 30s and early 40s. I was too busy making my way through the world in journalism and politics to notice or even have any time for my hobbies. All that changed in 2019 while I was working on a documentary film at the Charles H. Wright African American Museum in Detroit. And the main exhibit traced the history of Black Americans from a fictional West African village to present-day Detroit. I was intrigued. I had to go in. Now would be a good time to pause and mention that I moved to Mexico a few years earlier. The increased rate of Black Americans killed at the hands of police officers and the complacency of white people around that alarmed me. That, coupled with the election in 2016, sent me abroad. But I returned to Detroit for a documentary I was producing called Detroit Rising. It's about Black community leaders who implemented restorative practices in nearly every sector of the city. We weren't allowed to film in the exhibit, And that gave me a chance to experience it as a civilian. And as I walked in, the docent said, "You're really going to love it. It's a powerful exhibit." The fictional West African village is lovely and colorful, but things take a dark turn as the exhibit descends into the bowels of a slave ship. It's cavernous, dark, damp. Holes that look like giant shoe caddies line the walls. There is a mannequin in every hole to represent the way captive Africans were stacked, ankle to wrist. A soundtrack of moans and cries plays on endless loop, and as I hear it, I am completely sucked in. I sink to my knees and cry. I feel an overwhelming anguish, terror, and horror. This is what it must feel like to be cargo, to be treated as if you're subhuman. And for all the slave narratives that I read, nothing could prepare me for this. My sobbing stops. I stand up. I feel shaken. Is there a message here? And if so, what is it? A few months, actually, later, I stand waist deep in a swimming pool. I am terrified and annoyed. Why am I here? Why does anyone want to learn to swim, especially at my age? And after 3 years in Mexico, I figured out, hey, it's time for me to learn how to swim because I live in a water community. But I hate every minute of it. I do not understand when people tell me that swimming is meditative. No, it's not. Water is a grave. But there is a question mark behind my fear. Why was I and so many other Black people I know afraid of swimming in open water? So I started reading about epigenetics, which is the study of genes being passed on. I learned about how generational trauma can be passed through our DNA. One study, for example, found that children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors were more prone to PTSD and stress, even without experiencing severe trauma of their own. And if this trauma is true of Holocaust survivors, could it also be true of the descendants of enslaved Africans? What if our fear of swimming in open water wasn't about getting our hair wet or any of those other ridiculous theories, but what if the fear was inherited trauma from the experience of our ancestors on the slave ships, with water used as an instrument of torture? This theory explained my fear of swimming, and knowing that really helped me feel a little bit better about not wanting to swim. There wasn't anything wrong with me. And up until that point, I beat myself up about it. But if my fear was a result of multi-generational trauma, then it's not my fault. And that fear was like my ancestors' presence protecting me when I was a child. Understanding something doesn't always mean liking the task at hand. And here I was, standing in the water with the swim teacher. And the first thing that he asked me to do is put my head under the water, which I hate doing. But if I want to learn how to swim, I'm going to have to. So I take a deep breath. I steel myself. I dunk my head in the water. And suddenly, an image of a slave ship appears. It's not there, but it's there. And I can see it. And I come back up and I think, oh, that was weird. Maybe it's the heat from the tropical sun getting to me. He asks me to do it again. I take a deep breath, stick my head in the water, and again, I see the slave ship, like it's right there. I come back up, and this is weird, especially since it's happened twice. The swim instructor tells me to do it again. I take a deep breath, I steel myself, and there is the slave ship again. In that moment, I understand. I come back up to the surface of the water with a new sense of purpose. I know that I need to make a documentary about me learning how to swim, dive, and map the wreckage of slave ships. And so I get on with it. I find my crew, I fundraise. Turns out making a movie is hugely expensive. It's good and it's hard work. But one of the things that makes it harder is health issues. I was diagnosed with endometriosis in my 30s, and I go to many doctors who tell me that there's nothing to worry about. Things will clear up on their own. Turns out I have fibroids, which are non-cancerous growths on your uterus. And again, the doctors tell me not to worry. They're going to go away on their own. I see a woman gynecologist in Mexico who was recommended to me, and I'm hoping that because she's a woman, she'll be more empathetic than the other doctors I encountered. Nope. She sternly told me, "You've got 7 of these. I can't treat you until you lower your blood pressure." But she wouldn't tell me how. She just says, the fibroids will go away. But they don't. I have such heavy periods that I carry a towel around me everywhere I go when I sit down. And my periods are so painful that they knock me out for several days. Finally, I find myself in an office with yet another gynecologist in Mexico. And during the ultrasound, which you all saw, I pulled up my shirt. He rubs the cold jelly on my stomach and gasped when he looked at the picture on the screen. And he said, "You have 7 fibroids. One of them is larger than your uterus. If you don't have a hysterectomy, you will die." But will I? Every other doctor said that the fibroids would go away on their own. Is he trying to get more money out of me? I have no insurance and would have to pay for the surgery out of pocket. Besides, I had a movie to film and my birthday was coming up in a couple of weeks. Maybe I could schedule the hysterectomy after my birthday. Everything goes as planned until it doesn't. One night, 2 weeks after filming, I'm sick in my apartment. I'm bleeding. I can't stop throwing up. I have to go to the emergency room. I call my people, but nobody picks up because it's 3 a.m. So I realize I have to drive myself to the hospital. And for the next 40 minutes, I will myself not to throw up. Finally, I arrive in the emergency room, and the nurses keep asking me questions that I can't answer because I'm sick. And someone gives me medicine, my stomach settles. I get in touch with Dr. Luis, who says, "You need to book a hysterectomy right now." After the surgery, I'm recovering in the hospital when I receive a text from Dr. Luis. It's a picture of my uterus. He seems kind of proud of it, and later he tells me, "We didn't think you were going to make it. We were sweating bullets in the operating room." My uterus looks horrifying on the metal table. It looks like an alien football. It's like the shape of a football, but with these white puffy things sticking out. And I realize this is what multi-generational trauma looks like. This is what happens when the trauma of slavery and racism lives in your body. I'm sent home with lots of medicine, but no real information about what to do or what to expect while recovering from a hysterectomy. I Google things like fibroids and hysterectomy, and I discovered that fibroids are an unspoken epidemic in the Black community. Black women have more instances of fibroids than any other racial group. We have more fibroids, our fibroids are larger, and we get them younger than any other women. And hysterectomies are often the most recommended form of treatment, even though there are less invasive treatments available if caught in time. I felt like doctors were literally snatching our wombs. I realized that the focus of my film has to shift. It's one thing to be scared of swimming. It's another not to advocate for yourself in a medical system that's proven time and time again to be racist. A study of medical students, for example, found that even they think that Black women have a higher pain tolerance. Therefore, they are less likely to suggest earlier intervention, non-invasive treatment, or even give us medicine to ease our pain. If I can prove to other Black women that our chronic illnesses and poor health outcomes are partly the result of the multi-generational trauma we have inherited, specifically from our ancestors' connection to these slave ships, maybe we can demand a culturally competent, or at least non-racist healthcare system. Fibroids can get the proper medical attention it deserves, and Black women will be included in critical medical trials in fibroids research. I didn't write this down, but one of the things I wanted to say is that I'm really tired of Black women dying of preventable diseases. Just as my ancestors looked out for me all those years ago in the summer of purple rain, it is my responsibility to protect the future of Black women. And even though I am unable to have children, through making this documentary, I can teach generations of people that their physical and emotional trauma is not their fault. Our world may be broken, but honey, we are not. This is how I can be a good ancestor, and that's why I'm making this documentary. Thank you.